Good morning. Welcome to QX Church. You find us online at qxchurch.org. We are continuing our Google Hangouts ongoing experiment. We kind of think we have this down now. We thought we had it down better than we did. We were going over the last few things before we started broadcasting and found out we didn't have the right microphone hooked up, and so it was actually running through the internal mic on the computer. So we're still trying to get this system down. So, but from time to time, we'll broadcast on Google Hangouts, and probably most of the time we'll continue doing our regular video. And so there'll be some of each over the course of time, and the experiment will continue. So this is QX Women lesson number 2. QX Women lesson number 2. We're going to talk about Deborah the judge, and we're going to talk about the Proverbs 31 woman. So Deborah the judge. This is Judges chapter 4, verse 1. Now, Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at the time. She held court under the palm of Deborah. Now, presumably, the palm of Deborah was called the palm of Deborah because it was where she held court. But people evidently knew where that was, and this was telling them why it was called the palm of Deborah. It mentions that she's a wife. It mentions that she's a prophetess. So she held an office as a prophet, as a female prophet. She was married. Elsewhere, talking about the story of Deborah, that she's a mother in Israel, so we know she had children. So she's a wife, she's a mother, she's a prophetess, and she became the leader of Israel. A common teaching is that a woman was raised up as a judge because no men anywhere in Israel were qualified. Now, that is a fairly common teaching. The idea of that teaching kind of goes something like this. That God puts out a job opening, looking for a leader of Israel. And he goes through the resume of every single male citizen of Israel old enough to hold the position, whatever the age requirements might have been. So say, for instance, if we're going to use today's standards, that you want an adult, you want someone who's 18 or older, and the guy goes through every single male citizen of Israel to see, can you do the job? Can you do the job? Can you do the job? And after he has exhausted every single male in Israel, then God goes to the woman and says, okay, well, no man is capable of doing this job. Okay, fine. I guess we're stuck with a woman. And that's kind of the idea behind this teaching. Except, of course, if the problem is qualification, God routinely called the unqualified. If God will qualify the called rather than merely call the qualified, which is a common saying, then what would have stopped God from just raising up a judge from somewhere among his people? I mean, look at the quality of the people he used as judges. Look at how well Samson actually followed the morality of the Israelite teaching. Look at Gideon, who stood 300 men against the Midianites, and how scared he was. The whole idea of putting out a fleece, we get that from Gideon. Where Gideon's going, well, let me put out the fleece, and if the fleece is wet and the ground is dry. If the ground is wet and the fleece is dry, okay, fine. And then he finally went. After an angel of the Lord appeared to him. And so you get some of these things where God doesn't wait until someone's qualified and then calls them. He calls someone and he puts them through a process to get them qualified, to get them to understand, yes, this is me. Samson got supernatural strength. Moses was making his excuses. That's how he ended up with Aaron. So God doesn't have to check everyone's resume and see if by their own resume they can do it. The implication here is that Deborah was just a leader because she was the leader. Nowhere does the Bible say anything about no men being qualified. Nowhere does it indicate even that having a female judge is in any way an indictment on Israel. It just says that Deborah was the leader. It's just a matter of fact. And there's a lot of interesting things tied up in this, because Deborah was just the leader, but she was also a prophetess. Now, because she was a prophet basically is the thus saith the Lord. God speaks to the prophet, and the prophet speaks on behalf of God. And so if Deborah became the leader and she held the office as prophet, there's a couple of things you can reasonably assume. That she took the mantle of leadership without objection from God. Now, you can also infer, but it's a little less certain, that God may have raised her up. The Bible actually doesn't say it. It does say with others that God raised them up. In this case, it says this is a prophetess that becomes the leader. It doesn't specifically say God raised her up to be the leader because she also was an unusual judge and that she held no military function. She was the leader of Israel, but she was a civilian leader. They had a separate general. And with the separate general, there was a split then between the civilian leadership under Deborah and then the military leadership under General Barak, I believe was his name. Well, an interesting thing happens as a lot of this unfolds is that the general has come to Deborah at Deborah's beckoning. Deborah summoned the general, and so now the general's there in front of Deborah. And Deborah passes along a message from God. The basis is go against the enemies, and you will defeat them. And the general says, whoa, can you come with me? Now, here's the indictment on this. First off, the men held the military positions. So the women didn't have military positions. Deborah had a civilian leadership position. She didn't have a post in the military. She wasn't a warrior. She wasn't a military commander. But she was a prophetess, and she was the leader of Israel. The general wanted Deborah to come with. It's a lot like the President of the United States is sending the general off to warn the general, but Mr. President, could you come with us, please? Deborah wasn't a fighter. Deborah wasn't a commander. Deborah had no role in a military campaign. Now, because Barak said he would only go if the woman would go, Deborah, not being a warrior, not having any military position, which, as we said, is unlike the other judges. The other judges had a military position. The military leadership and the civilian leadership were unified under most of the judges. Deborah had a different kind of administration. And since the warrior would not go to war without the woman, God handed victory to Israel through another woman, Jael. In an act of unexpected violence, this woman, when Sisera comes to her, puts him up in a tent, brings him milk, and then there's some implications that he knows, or she knows, he's going to fall asleep because on a hot, dry day, when he's dehydrated, he's being fed milk. Now, milk is a liquid, but it's a liquid food. It doesn't hydrate you like water does. And so he falls asleep. And then she goes and gets a tent spike, which evidently are these tiny little plastic things that we see in tents today. I mean, we're talking a serious metal tent spike. Puts it on his temple, grabs a hammer, and hammers the tent spike through this king's temple. Now, besides being an unexpectedly violent act by a woman, it's actually a very effective way of killing someone. And because she was a woman, no one thought that she was going to do something like this. And so she had access. And the man dies. The king dies. Israel wins the battle. The enemy king is dead. God used one woman to lead his nation and used another woman to kill the enemy king. And so there are many places in the Bible. In fact, this isn't the only place in the Bible where a woman is responsible for a killing. So some of the idiosyncrasies when you deal with biblical history is that women are doing things that a lot of people don't seem to expect. But because it's just sort of mentioned almost matter-of-factly in the narrative, it's not like this is a terribly unusual thing. The part that was unusual is God gave the victory through a woman. But no one jumps on this one, well, how could you do that? That's terrible. A woman committing such an act of violence. There's no mention of that. It's just that she did it. And that it shouldn't have been her. It should have been the general. It was the man's job to go to war, but the man insisted on taking the woman. And so God said, all right, well, you're going to take a non-warrior woman to war, So I'm not going to give the credit to the warriors. I'm going to give the credit to a woman. And Jael got the credit because she's the one that did it. And these kind of things are all over the Bible. And of course, we talked about a lot of them last week, where we talked about the elevation, God's high regard for women. And one of the things to always keep in mind whenever you're looking at things is keep it in context of the society and culture that they were living in at the time. What surrounded them at the time. How they were different than the cultures of their day. And when you consider that, you see that God was always elevating women, even as human society was always trying to put women down. God was always trying to block the drop and help the elevation. And I believe, this is a personal belief of mine, was elevating women, trying to get equality between men and women as far as he knew human beings would be able to accept, without just taking the whole Bible and chucking it. And there's a thing in the Bible where God knows the primary message of the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, combined is salvation through Jesus Christ. In the process of that being ultimately the core message, all the rest of it, he needs to have not be so much of a controversy that people will reject Jesus Christ because they're so upset of how God's elevating women, or any of the other issues. But that these shifts do occur, and that he's constantly trying to move society along. It's like, okay, people, we're moving, we're maturing as a civilization. Come on, let's go. Now, the Proverbs 31 woman. The Proverbs 31 woman is often set forth as an ultimate example of what it means to be a woman. And the emphasis typically is on the role of wife, the role of mother, and it kind of ties into the whole wives submit to your husbands, and we're going to get into that in a later lesson. The Proverbs 31 woman has a lot of things tucked in here sometimes that just get overlooked. They kind of get glossed over. They might have mention made of them, but to pause for a moment and consider the implications of some of these is huge. So Proverbs 31 verse 10, an excellent wife who can find, for her worth is above jewels. The idea here is a great woman is priceless. Okay, we get that part. You hear that part of Proverbs 31 a lot. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. A simple idea here is a great woman is a partner, not an opponent. Now, by the way, this is a good thing to pause and reflect on as both a man and a woman, as both a husband and a wife. It says the heart of her husband trusts in her. The heart of her husband trusts in her has two implications. One is he's able to trust women. He's able in particular to trust his wife. So if you're a boy growing up and you have women issues, this is going to be a problem. You're going to find yourself unable to trust, not because of anything a particular woman does, but just because you have woman issues. Can you let go? Can you just trust the woman? Even though she's a woman. And there are some people who have issues, who've been burned, maybe by a mother, maybe by a stepmother, maybe by a girlfriend, maybe by a wife, and they've lost trust of an entire sex. Now, women do the same thing to men sometimes. They get burned by a man, sometimes a father, maybe an uncle, a boyfriend, that something bad's happened to her, and then because she's burned, she blames the whole sex. Now, not on purpose and not consciously, but subconsciously. Kind of runs autopilot in the heart, where you start to blame an entire half of the population for something one or two or three individuals did. And imagine how crazy that is. Well, that's, well, I've been badly burned in my past by someone with two arms. Because you know what people with two arms are like. Everyone look at me and go, that's kind of ridiculous. Well, so is blaming an entire half of the global population. So you look for the individual behavior. So the heart of her husband trusts in her. So that's part. He's able to trust. The other part, of course, she has to be trustworthy. Can he trust this individual who he's chosen to marry? So as women, can you be trusted? Can you be trusted with the things of your husband, the things of a man? And in modern society, that side seems to be more of a problem than the other. There's been times where the biggest issue is men as a whole seem to have this disrespect, which then leads to a lack of reliance upon and therefore a distrust of women in general. In kind of our feminist, post-feminist culture, it seems to flip the other way. Now it's women that seem to have a deep distrust of men, that don't want to believe in men, don't want to trust men, don't want to rely on them for anything, that are willing to jump on masculine things as though they're immature and stupid, when really all it is that they're just masculine things. He says, the heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. Now there's a partnership here. So if we back up a little bit in history, Mr. and Mrs. Ford, Henry Ford, founder of Ford Motor Company, he was sitting in his room one time, he and his wife working together, trying to get this piston to shoot out of this tube. And they got to shoot out once, and that was the very beginning of the internal combustion engine, trying to make this thing, how can we build these things? And he was building one of his very first cars, and he needed some foundry parts. And he went to the foundry to get the parts, and he said, well, I don't have the cash right now, but I'll pay you at the end of the month. And I said, no. Money on the barrelhead, or you don't get the parts. And so, Henry went home to his wife, and he told his wife, well, I can't get the parts, he won't give me the credit, we don't have the $30, and I could pay him at the end of the month, if only he would extend the credit. And Mrs. Ford was the one that said, well, we have that savings. Yes, I know we have $1,200 in savings, but we promised we wouldn't use that for anything but to build a house. And she said, well, don't take any of the money, but you can borrow $30 out of that account. We're good for $30. If we're good for $30 in the account, we're good for $30 to our home savings account. And Henry said, well, if you put it that way, so he borrowed money from their home savings account, he got his foundry parts, he finished building his car, and he paid himself back. And of course, eventually he was able to found Ford Motor Company, and he became a multi-millionaire at a time when millions really meant something. It'd be like being, one of the billionaires of today. And how did that happen? Is that Mrs. Ford, the female side, the wife, keeping in mind that the day and age, this is the beginning of the 20th century we're talking about here, that this is going on. At a time when people are kind of thinking, well, women are put down, women are partners, and Mr. and Mrs. Ford were partners, not opponents. She did him good. She didn't do him evil. And he ultimately, of course, had no lack of gain. So there's a whole dynamic in here you could totally unpack. But the bottom line for this lesson is a great woman is a partner, not an opponent. And thus should be treated like a partner and not an opponent. Should behave like a partner and not an opponent. Continuing on with verse 13. She looks for wool and flax and works with her hands in the light. She is like merchant ship. She brings her food from afar. She rises also while it is still night and gives food to her household and portions to her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. From her earnings she plants a vineyard, and she senses her gain is good. Her lamp does not go out at night. She stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hands grasp the spindle. She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. She makes coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. She makes linen garments and sells supplies and belts to the tradesmen. Now, there's a lot of it. As we start getting into something like this, a key thing to consider is this is probably not an average day in the life of a woman. And any given day, she's probably not out buying real estate, planting vineyards, staying up all night, making clothing. But you're not going to do all this stuff in one day. The way I want you to think of the Proverbs 31 woman is these are like touching on highlights of things this woman has done over, say, the last 10 or 20 years. These are giving examples of what a great Proverbs 31 woman would be. Does that mean you have to do every single one of them? Of course not. Does that mean you have to do any of them exactly the way they're stated? Of course not. It doesn't mean you have to go engage in a real estate transaction or you're not a Proverbs 31. It doesn't mean you have to go plant grapes for a vineyard or you're not a Proverbs 31. It doesn't mean that your kids have to be in red clothing or you're not a Proverbs 31 woman. Hopefully some of these things are pretty obvious. And you begin to see the obviousness of these being examples of, then you can translate them to what would your version of this be. Most of us probably are going to be engaged in a lot of real estate transactions for business. Some of us maybe. Most of us probably not. Most of us probably are going to have your wife go out and say, oh yeah, you want to buy a real estate, you want to start a business, yeah, just go ahead. I don't need to know anything about it. Just go. I mean, in this day and age, these require the husband and the wife. Both people have to sign loan documents. Both they tend to be on the deeds. I mean, it requires a different type of partnership. But look at part of what's going on here. A great woman takes care of the team. Now, in this case, her team that we're talking about here is her husband and her children. She's taking care of her family. Now, take note, in this passage, she has her own earnings. So she's making some money on her own. And she controls her own money. She decides what she does. She's making money on real estate, and she plants the vineyard. So she decides to do it. So the money she makes is under her control. The money she makes, she's decided that her children will have the scarlet clothes, which is expensive clothing. That's the good stuff. It's the stuff that's going to last for a while. It's not the stuff you're going to have to keep replacing. So she's not, shopping at Walmart, but she's shopping at Nordstrom's because she's got the financial resources to do stuff like this in this particular scenario. She's investing on her own. So she's making her own money. She has her own money. She controls her own money. She invests her own money. She starts her own business. She tends to her primary responsibilities, her household. But she has an economic life as well. She has a life outside the home. And as you explore all of the things it's talking about, a significant portion of this is a life outside the home. It's having, in her case, a business. And it's also having a charitable life. And also take note here, and portions to her maidens. One reason she has time to get so much done is she has staff. She has people in her employ. Anything done by staff is attributed to the employee. And so if she has staff, if she has a team of people that are working for her, no wonder she can get so much done. What is she personally doing from the moment she wakes up to the moment she goes to bed? We don't really know for sure. But she has a team that works for her that evidently she also takes care of. And when we consider some of this stuff, how much more could you get done if you had people working for you? Now, all of this, if this is the amount of money that the woman has, how much wealth does the man have? What's going on in the entire dynamic? We're going to get into some of that later because they say the husband has no lack of gain. Well, she's mostly controlling her own finances. I mean, how much else is there in addition to that? But, so ladies, how much easier would it be to keep your house clean if you have a housekeeper? How much easier would it be to cook fabulous meals every night if you have a cook? How much easier would it be to get all of your errands run if you have a personal assistant? Obviously, all these things get easier when you start to have a team of employees that are working for you. Verse 17, she girds herself with strength and makes her arms strong. So a great woman is in great shape. Now, in this particular case, we might have been talking about the strength that was required in her day and age, because stuff was harder back then. I mean, you didn't go and pick up a 1 gallon jug of water and carry it in this really light little plastic container. I mean, you were taking your heavy things to the well, and you were carrying them. It required some measure of physical strength, some measure of being in good physical shape just to live an ordinary life. But there wasn't much in the way of, you couldn't hang out at home watching soap operas and eating bonbons. You wouldn't survive that. But she girds herself with strength that makes her arm strong, because it's more than just an ordinary living. She's actually doing things to be stronger. She's doing this on purpose. So a great woman being in great shape here, she's deciding what kind of shape she needs to be in, and she's pursuing it. And so for modern women, because the nature of modern life doesn't require the same kind of physical strength, if you choose to be in great physical shape, it tends to be more of a conscious decision with a going out of your way sort of activity in order to do that. Whether you're doing yoga or Pilates, whether you're doing martial arts or dance, whatever it is you're doing to be in good shape. 23, her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. So a great woman is a great leader. That because of the Proverbs 31 woman that the husband has gained, and because of the Proverbs 31 woman, her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. And so she is a great leader, that her influence, her presence, her partnership, her masterminding with her husband is contributing to her husband being known, being among the elders. Now, here's the flip side. Of course, he has to be worthy of this. Because it doesn't matter what kind of support you have if you're not worthy of the respect. If you get to be known, and as you get to be known for who you are, what you do, what you know, how smart you are, how dumb you are, how wise you are, how foolish you are, when you become known, are you worthy of that kind of honor and respect you kind of want to have come along with a little bit of fame, a bit of a reputation? The reputation precedes you. Hopefully that means it's a good reputation. So the man must be worthy, and of course the woman is a partner. Now here's something called a kingmaker technique. As a woman, if you want to help your man step it up and be a leader, be more worthy of respect, here's a fairly simple technique called the kingmaker technique. Number one, listen. So hear him out. Now this can be tough sometimes, because every once in a while, I don't know if anyone's noticed this, when people are talking, they're not making a lot of sense. Men, women, children, adults, whatever. From time to time, people don't make sense. So you listen. Hear them out. And don't listen to reply. Don't listen to argue. Listen to understand. Step number two, ask questions. Ask clarifying questions designed to aid his thinking. Now, you can do this with kids, too. I mean, if you try to raise them, the kingmaker technique is just as easy as the kingmaker technique. When you're helping someone be a better leader, think through things in their domain, listen, ask questions. Number three, there's an A and a B. If you agree, well, then you give them your support. You back them up 100%. If you disagree, ask more questions. Rather than just challenge them outright, ask questions. Now, I will tell you a secret about men and women. Is no matter how much a man might be able and willing to step up in the general workplace and handle any opposition, most men have great difficulty handling opposition from their own wives. Most men, because they love their wives differently than they care about all these other people, are vulnerable to their wives in a way they're not vulnerable to the general population. And of course, the same thing goes the other way. A wife is vulnerable to her husband in a way she's typically not vulnerable to the general population. Because of that, we need to make sure we stay partners, not opponents, because we tend not to survive opposition very well. And even things when it comes to judgment, if I'm out in the workforce and someone's talking about something and maybe they don't know that I do it, and they're very judgmental over something. Say they're talking about martial arts and there's idiots in martial arts and what's wrong with them. We live in a civilized society and they don't know a martial arts master. I find it sometimes annoying, frustrating, ignorant even, but it doesn't cut my heart. But if my wife does something like that, that lodges in there. That hurts. So that's why instead of just argue over stuff, ask more questions. Help them arrive at an answer. Now, here's number 4. Final responsibility determines final decision. Whoever has the final responsibility for the outcome should ultimately have the final decision. And that sometimes is hard. So with my mother and father, my father owned a business, ran the business. Final responsibility for what happened in that business rested with him. Now, there were some things he did my mother disagreed with. But as she explained it to me, she said, ultimately, I did my job. I listened. I asked him questions. I gave him some information I knew that I didn't think he knew. If he still is set on his course, that's his domain, I leave it to him. Because I'm not responsible for the outcome. And if something I think needs to be done, break something, I'm not the one that has to clean up the mess. I'm not the one who has to be there every day, 14 hours a day, He does. And so I let it go. That's his domain. And a lot of times, he's been right. Because when he's there, he lives and breathes it. I'm not there. I'm just getting the information secondary. Sometimes I've been right. And you have to resist the temptation to do the I told you so. Because once you start into the I told you so's, you've ended the conversation. Now they're never going to talk to you. And so I learned this kingmaker technique from my mother. Verse 25. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she smiles at the future. A great woman is excited about the future. She has plans. She has an idea. Because she understands principles. She knows how things work. She can create her future instead of waiting for the future to come grinding into her. A lot of people who don't have a grasp of the principles, who don't have a good partnership, they're worried about the future. They don't know what's going to happen. And so when you're facing the future, even if you just have the, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's you and me, babe, against the world. Well, our family will get through this somehow. We'll do what it takes as a team. Then a lot of times you can get through just about anything. You understand principles. How does this work? What can we do? What are our options? And we will work together for whatever it takes. And you can smile in the future. Verse 26, she opens her mouth in wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. A great woman is a great teacher. A great woman is a great teacher. And she's a great teacher because she has wisdom. Wisdom is applied knowledge. So step one is knowledge. You must amass knowledge. You have to know things. And step number two, application. Knowledge is power is not correct. Knowledge is only power when properly applied. And teaching with kindness includes teaching others to be kind and also kindly teaching wisdom. She extends her hand to the poor. She stretches out her hands to the needy. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. A great woman has work to do. The goal of wealth is not to be one of the idle rich. So it talks about she does not eat the bread of idleness. So obviously this is a woman of sufficient means that she doesn't have to work. She's not generating revenue necessary for the survival of the household. It seems like they're very wealthy. They have a staff. She has income. He has income. They have real estate. They have businesses. The goal of passive wealth is so you can live your lifestyle without working. That's the passive wealth part. To unleash your time to fulfill some cause, some call, some purpose beyond yourself. So when you get to the level where you no longer need to work, you can live your lifestyle without working. The goal is not to be idle, not to just become a pure consumer, but then to become involved in other things. Maybe to build more businesses, maybe to do some new and exciting things. Again, we're finding out some stuff, one of which is if you try to pause a Google Hangout and go off air, you're done with it. So if you're following the video, it's broken into two parts. I'll see if I can download and splice them back together. And on the audio, so you understand what that little glitch was. So we're talking about Proverbs 31. We're on verse 28 now. Her children rise up and bless her. Her husband, he praises her. Many daughters have done nobly, but you excel them all. A great woman is worthy of blessings and praise. A great woman is worthy of blessings, so she should receive blessings. A great woman is worthy of praise, so she should receive praise. Now, one of the keys in here, and this has to do with all human endeavor, we as human beings, for whatever reason, seem very quick to criticize. We're very quick to go negative. We're very quick to insult. When we're offended by something, then we're very quick to feel riled up and to have a problem with it, and to learn to keep quiet. The silver rule of, whatever you hate, don't do. That don't do unto others what you want others to not do unto you, to do no harm. Sometimes we just forget that. And the part that's even harder on this is sometimes we forget the flip side. So not only often do we forget to kind of hold back the criticism, the classic, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all, which isn't, of course, entirely true. But if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all until you've had time to decide
Is this really necessary, and what is the best way to communicate this? That part probably is true. Not that you never say anything bad, but you have to think about it. What is the best way to say it? Because it still needs to be effective, but I also want to be as nice as possible. I don't want to damage the relationship any more than necessary. The part that we also tend to forget is to do the blessings, to do the praise. When something is worthy of praise, forgetting to compliment people, forgetting to comment on things that go well, forgetting to comment on things that are impressive. Now, here's one of the things that gets to be even more of a problem in our society, is when we do remember to do it, how often is it just dismissed? You see someone and say like, hey, that's a sharp-looking tie. Oh, yeah, whatever, I guess, I don't really like ties. Excuse me, you just missed the compliment. It's like, wow, I like what you did with your hair. It's like, oh, yeah, this is all dirty. I don't really like it. Like, you just toss the compliment again. When you do things like this, when you dismiss people's compliments, what you're really saying is, will you please stop complimenting me? And guess what? They will. And it gets worse than that, because when people get that kind of negative feedback, there's a natural tendency for them to stop complimenting anybody. Because when you start getting negative feedback again and again and again in a row, it's very easy to generalize that and just stop doing it. So if you give a compliment, it gets dismissed. You give a compliment to someone else, it gets dismissed. You give a compliment to a third person, it gets dismissed. You just, well, why bother even complimenting people? So if that happens, you still compliment people. Still talk about their attributes. Still talk about their accomplishments. Still, when they do something impressive, feel free to mention it. So when someone is worthy of blessings and praise, bless them and give them praise. Verse 30, charm is deceitful and beauty is vain. A woman who fears the Lord, she shall be respected. So here we see a great partner, a great woman respects ultimate truths. Ultimate truths. Now the charm is deceitful means that public behavior may or may not tell you what things are really like behind closed doors. Most socialites are charming in public. Most people are nice to your face. So the charm is deceitful doesn't mean that just because someone's charming that they're being deceitful. But what it does mean is that deceitful people will still be charming. Basically what this boils down to is like the con men, is the bad guys try to look like good guys. The good guys look like good guys because they're good guys. The bad guys look like good guys because they get good at pretending to be good guys, so you don't think of them as bad guys. So what ends up happening, though, is sometimes we learn to distrust everybody. So the charm is deceitful just means you can't trust just the charm. Is that doesn't tell you if they're a good guy or a bad guy, if they're a great woman or a not so great woman. Is it just someone who knows how to behave in public, or is it someone who really is this way? Because socialites learned how to be charming. Beauty is vain. This does not mean that being beautiful is being vain. What it does mean is the external beauty cannot be the foundation of one's worth. That you cannot base your value as a human being, your value as a woman, on what does my face look like? What does my body look like? What is my hair like? What kind of clothes do I have? Am I in the latest fashion? How do I stand up to the supermodel that I see in the magazine who doesn't even look like that because she had to diet and peak for that, and then they airbrushed her and photoshopped her and distorted her own image, so even the actress doesn't look like the actress and the model doesn't look like the model. But that's going to be the standard I'm going to measure myself by, and if I don't look like it, I'm going to feel bad about myself. You don't do that. That's vain. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. I mean, Ecclesiastes, 1:2b. It means that's not the value that we may think it is. Being beautiful doesn't make you a better woman. It just makes you a beautiful woman. That is not an element of worth as a human being. It's wonderful. I love beautiful women. They add a tremendous amount of beauty to the world, but it doesn't mean that as a human being she's worth anymore. It just means that she's beautiful. I personally appreciate the kind of beauty that is earned, the kind of beauty that shines out through the eyes and the smile, because it's a matter of who she is as a human being. I appreciate the kind of beauty of the things that she chose. Like, I like a woman who has a beautiful body because she has chosen to stay in shape, not just because she was born with it. So when you see some, cute, 19-year-old bikini body, kind of workout queen, you go, okay, you're 19. Now, when you've had 5 kids and you get back in shape, now that's impressive. Now, you may not look the same as the 19-year-old who's being hired to be a sports model. You're not supposed to. The fact that you are in pretty good shape after having that many children is really impressive. And so that's the things that I personally look at. And most men who kind of mature in their appreciation of feminine beauty understand this. That beauty is vain. It's not the foundation of who she is. That, the woman doesn't choose her genetics. The woman doesn't choose her bone structure. And a woman has a life to live that isn't going to be 100% devoted just to how she looks, at least one hopes. Unless, of course, that's her profession. I mean, if she's a professional model, she has to do that. If she's a professional actress, she probably has that as a component of her lifestyle. But for most people, you have work to do. You have kids to take care of. You have a life to live. And that this needs to be kind of an adjunct, something that gets added in when and if there's time. Even if you're trying to prioritize it, other things are going to be a higher priority. You're not going to skip out on your kids because, well, kids, I know that you need mom to feed you, but no dinner tonight because I have to go do my workout. You're not going to do stuff like that. So the beauty is vain doesn't mean that looking beautiful is being vain, but it does mean it cannot be the foundation of your worth. Verse 31, give her the product of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. So a great partner, a great woman, deserves the fruit of her labors. Very often, sometimes, what tends to happen is we forget who's earning stuff. And that we tend to treat everything that someone does as automatically belonging to us. Now, there is a sense of, whatever you do and whatever I do contributes to an ours. Where it becomes a problem is where what you do contributes to the mine. And so in this case, in a day and an age where men would control the household resources, the household wealth that was considered his, it says, give her the product of her hands and let her works praise her in the gates. Her works praise her in the gates. So if she did it, she gets credit for it. And if she earned it, she should have control over it. She gets the product of her hands. In a day and age where the man had the authority that whatever she got was his to control, he could do whatever he wanted with it. He was held responsible for taking care of the family. But in practical application, he could be selfish with it. He could treat her income as equal to his income under his control for anything he wanted. Now, even in this day and age, we have had similar problems when children are earning money. When you have minors earning money and then the adults are in control, and when it comes to like child actors, we had issues arising where the children were sometimes earning hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars, and the parents were blowing it because the kids didn't have access to all of their own accounts because they were kids. And we actually had to pass laws that protected the child's income so that the child wouldn't be earning millions in their youth and then become an adult and it's all gone because, mom and dad and stepmom, stepdad, boyfriends, girlfriends all blew it. So a great woman deserves the fruit of her labors. She deserves to have benefit from what she does. Now, there's a tendency in society still, you would like to think it wouldn't still be this way, but it tends to be, where you have a man and a woman, they're married to one another, he's working full time, so he's got 40 hours to 60 hours a week of work to do, he's gone for his commute and all of that, so he's earning all the money, and then she's the housewife. She's the stay-at-home mom. So her life centers around the children, it centers around the home. Under those circumstances, it might be completely reasonable if she does most of or even all of the inside house chores because that's her job. That's what she has. And is it going to be done perfectly? Kind of depends on the kids, right? If there's no children at home and she's a permanent housewife with no kids to take care of, okay, now that might be very reasonable. If there's a baby to take care of, sometimes you have a choice between taking care of the baby or taking care of the house. I lean toward take care of the baby. Here's where I have a problem with it, though. Also, very often, you have a man who's working, 40, 60 hours a week, and so he goes to work between his job time and his commute time, and he kind of expects her to do everything because she's at home. Okay, that's reasonable. But then she gets a job. Now she's also working 40 hours a week, 40, 60 hours when you factor in the commute and stuff. And somehow the wife, with a stunning amount of consistency, still ends up with the lion's share of the household to take care of. Doing the shopping, doing the cleaning, doing the cooking, doing the dishes, doing the laundry. How does that happen? A great partner deserves the fruit of her labors, and part of the fruit of the labors is I'm doing all the household stuff because you're at work and I'm at home. But if both of us are at work, then both of us need to split these other duties. I think that's reasonable. I mean, just think about it reversed. So what if, as the man of the house, what if you were doing everything? Say you're unemployed, you're looking for work, but you're unemployed. She's working full time. But okay, look, honey, I'm home. I'll run the kids to school. I'll pick them up. I'll take care of the house. While I'm getting my resumes out, getting my applications out. I'm kind of in this phase now where I've got nothing to do but wait. I mean, I'm just in the process. And, the next contract doesn't start for, another month. And so, I'll take care of the stuff. Well, then imagine then your contract does come up. You begin your work. And she still expects you to do everything. She still expects you to take the kids to school, pick them up, take care of the house, take care of the yard, take care of the shopping, take care of the cooking, take care of the cleaning, take care of just like when you were at home full time for that month off, but now you're working. I think most human beings would realize, well, that's kind of offensive. And yet somehow we don't think twice about doing that to the average wife, which I find incredibly unfortunate. And so those things need to be split based largely upon what is your total contribution to the home. And there's two ways to measure contribution to the home, by the way. One is in dollars. Now, this one gets to be a problem. Because if you're just measuring it in dollars, then the person who's earning more per hour of their time away from home feels like they don't have to do anything else. The other one is time. So say, for instance, we'll just go with even though the statistic isn't true in individual professions, there's a lot of issues with it. We'll just go with the median numbers. We'll say that she's working for 77 cents on the dollar for what he's working for. And so he's, say, bringing home $1,000 in a week, and she's bringing home $770 in a week. Well, he could go, well, I am earning most of the money, so you need to do most of the work. The other way to look at it is like both of you are spending 40 hours a week at a workplace. Both of you are commuting. So both of you are contributing 40 to 60 hours a week of your outside work time to generate revenue for the household. That is an equal amount of time investment. Now, the fact that one ends up getting more money for that than the other isn't a factor of the time investment. That's a factor of the pay scale. And very often, one of the reasons women make less money than men is that their work tends to be more temporary. They tend to gravitate to some of the lower paying jobs because part of their pay is the flexibility of the job and the ability to go in, to come out, to adjust the schedule around the kids and the family. And so part of their quote unquote paycheck is non-financial. So they might not make the same dollars sometimes, and sometimes for good reason, sometimes for no good reason. That no good reason part, that needs to be fixed. So when this is happening, when you have an equal investment outside the household, there also ought to be an equal investment of time in the household, an equal investment of effort in the household. Because a great partner deserves the fruit of her labors. And one of the fruit of her labors is, look, if I'm working outside just as much as you are, then I need you working as much inside as I am. That sounds fair, right? And of course, and let her works praise her in the gates is a great partner should be publicly edified. Publicly edified. So if she's doing good stuff, talk about it. If she's doing good stuff, praise her, lift her up. Now, this is another factor that tends to come from more insecure men, is there's a tendency, especially during a season where the wife might be dramatically outperforming the husband in any number of ways, that some men have issues with this. And I was talking with a husband one time where his problem was his wife was earning more money than him. Both of them were in the same profession. She went to work right out of college. She had a bachelor's degree. She became a CPA. She goes to work. She starts making money. Well, he had also graduated, and he had tried some other stuff and went back and got his master's degree. Well, then he's in the same profession she's in, but because he did his master's degree and has spent some summers doing some other things, he doesn't have the same seniority. So she's like 2 or 3 years ahead of him on the pay scale here. Now, his pay scale started higher than her pay scale started at because he's coming in with a master's while she started with a bachelor's. But in the 3 years, she was ahead of him. And he had to grapple with that. Just as a man, that was an issue for him for a while. In fact, it was worse back in the 70s, where one of the surest ways to kill a woman's career was to pay her more than her husband made. Then with stunning regularity, all of a sudden, her husband needed to move. And typically back in the 70s, the wife would follow the husband wherever the husband's job went, even if she was making more money. And they noticed this pattern in the 60s and the 70s. I would like to think that we've outgrown that, and we probably have it as a culture, but not necessarily in individual households. So edifying a partner who's actually doing better than you, who's actually beating you in your own area, that can be hard on a male ego. Needs to be done anyway. A great partner should be publicly edified. That her works praise her in the gates. What she did should praise her in the gates because she did it and she deserves the credit. And that's part of the fruit of her labors. So we're talking about great women, great partners, great wives. The Proverbs 31 woman, while specifically referring to a wife, can also be applied in any number of ways to women in general. And you'll notice a lot of these things that you might not normally think about when you go through the Proverbs 31 woman, that she's not this very quiet, submissive, male-dominated, mousy woman. She's a powerful woman. She's a capable woman. She has control of her own resources. She's doing her own things. That she has a strength and a resilience to her. And she may or may not be physically gorgeous. She may or may not be completely charming, but she realizes that it's not about the charm, it's not about the beauty, it's about her character. It's about who she is. It's about what she does. And as a woman, you can see that God's really elevating women by society standards around at that time. A woman gets to do business. A woman gets to buy property. A woman gets to plant a vineyard. A woman gets to have staff. Well, wealthy women had staff back then. But a woman gets to keep the fruit of her own labors. A woman gets to keep the money from her own business. A woman actually gets credit for what the woman did. How unusual that would have been thousands of years ago. And if we take that and consider now what would be unusual today for equality between men and women. And as we continue this series, we're actually going to start getting into some of the verses, some of the passages that seem to really put women down. That the women tend to complain about, and men tend to use to bludgeon women over the head and say, you can't do that. You're not allowed to speak in church. You have to submit. The wife submit to your husband means that she's in the passenger seat and he's the driver. He can do whatever he wants and she's just along for the ride. And I've actually heard that teaching. It's kind of scary to me. And I've heard the teaching that women just need to be quiet in church. That they just should show up, be sweet, be nice. Okay, maybe help us take care of the kids because none of the guys want to do that. But your job is not to argue, not to think, not to have an opinion. And of course, QX being QX, we disagree with that. So we're going to continue to dig into this. And as we dig into this more, you'll kind of see more of what was really going on. What was God doing here? Now, why all this thing? This came up again last week as one of the more profound things is when society shifts, it may be time to take another look at issues. That if you have a traditional view of something, it's easy to hold a traditional view when it's never an issue. But when it becomes an issue, then you need to take a look and say, okay, the traditional view, whether it was right or wrong, it didn't really matter because the structure of society kind of locked us into this mode. Well, now that the structure of society is creating more freedom, more flexibility, more options and opportunity, now it might be a good time to go take a look at the issue because now the right or wrongness of the issue really does make a difference. It makes a significant difference, a hugely meaningful difference. And so that's part of what we're doing here is we're taking a look at some of the traditional things, traditional views, a lot of things a lot of people have heard, and we're diving into them and we're saying, okay, when we unpack things from the Bible, Is there another view here? Are there things here that have commonly been missed? And as we explore that, we begin to find that God has always had high regard for women. And God has always elevated women as compared to the women in the surrounding culture. So this is Pastor Scott Conway at QX Church. Find us online at qxchurch.org. And thus endeth our Google Hangout experiment on this lesson. Thank you.